Hey, how are
Good,
you?
man. How are you?
Doing good.
Let's get my
Doing
camera
well.
situated here. All right, there we go. Beautiful.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for taking the time and doing this. Hopefully
No
it'll be
problem, man.
fun.
No
Yeah,
problem.
I just realized you're probably up in Ohio right now, right?
No, I leave tomorrow morning. I'm flying out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it says people are shooting today, shooting tomorrow. So, yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah, man.
I
Definitely.
didn't even plan to talk about that, but of course
Yeah,
of course we're definitely gonna bring it up.
definitely should.
Um, But yeah, like we talked, I think we're gonna skip an intro. If people need to know who you are, they can obviously look you up and go to your Instagram. Um, but one thing I did really want to kind of understand is how'd you get into USPSA? How long you been shooting? Did you have like some time in between, or did you jump right into competition shooting?
Uh, I've been around guns my whole life, but I started competing when I was in scouts. So, like, when I was in middle school, I took that pretty seriously and went through it really fast, and then segued into shooting. So I was competing and taking it seriously by the middle of 2012 and was shooting USPSA around 2013.
So it's been like 12 years now. Nice. What's your current training looking like right now?
It's it hasn't changed very much in terms of the structure. I mean, so I try to get the gun in my. I'm big on frequency more than volume, basically. So I try to do stuff as often as I can, and I'll try to make that as live fire as often as I possibly can. But the goal really is just to get the gun in my hand and spend as much time doing stuff as possible. So live fire mix will be like, usually I'll do something that's fundamentals focused first and then break out into doing something that's much more involved where I'm blending a bunch of different skills together. And usually that will expose something that I want to focus on more specifically that's a little bit more niche. That's kind of the general escalation is typically I'll start simple and go more difficult to more complex as the session goes on.
Nice. Yeah, that's one thing I want to talk about. Like, I've talked to like a good amount of people at this point now, like see kind of what their strategy is. Like, a lot of people are like, "Oh, I do this drill, this drill, this drill." And a lot of people are like, "I just throw a bunch of targets out there, and what skill I want to work on. That's what I focus on." I talk to some people, and they're like, "I just set up stages every single time, and I go out on a stage." Or I talk to people that are like, "I do only VR and like only dry fire, and I'll shoot a match once a month, and that will be my training." So it's interesting to see like what everyone's point of view. I mean, obviously you currently compete at the highest level, so seeing your kind of point of view on it is, I think, valuable. How often are you like setting up stages in your practice? Do you like kind of just like what I said, like just put out drills to what you want to train on? Like what does that kind of look like?
I think the place you have to start is with appropriately structured goals, honestly.
Yeah.
So like it's this that split is going to look different for people based on where they're at in their progression. So like the way I structure goals is I'll start with like a big picture statement for like stuff that I want to accomplish throughout the year, and then I'll set sub goals where basically, hey, I know I need to get better at these skills in order to make that happen, and the goals that support those individual big pillars will be easily auditable and usually get audited like every week or so to make sure it's headed in the right direction. And so it's broken out into sub skills that way, and then like translating that to the actual training structure split makes more sense. Like for most people, like what they need to do is just spend more time training in general, right? So when you're building skill, it makes sense to do more focused drills where you have an idea of what skills you need to work on, and you're working on those. In my mind, the place of doing stages or integration type of training where you're working on a bunch of different skills at once, or working on stages where you're trying to just execute to the best of your ability the first time.
Mhm.
Uh, that part becomes more relevant as you approach events that you're trying to prep for. But for most people, right, like they need to build more skills in the first place before they need to worry about integrating the skills they have. I would say if you're basically under A class, it's probably kind of a waste of time to be spending much time shooting stages and training, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense. Like, it's tough to justify training your execution of every skill combined if you can't execute one isolated skill to the best of your ability every single time. Because if you can't, obviously everyone messes up from time to time, but if you couldn't go and at least do 50% of the time, have the proper grip off the draw, you probably should be focusing on something like that in isolation versus doing stages over and over again, because you'll only get, say, one, draw. Obviously, that's one tiny skill, but one draw rep to a good grip. So I definitely agree there. How important do you think it is to like make your training difficult? I see a lot of people, they're just like, oh, I'm working on partials today, or they'll like throw out like a bunch of tuxedos or like far partial targets, 30-yard targets, and they kind of structure their training that way. But how important do you think that is versus just looking at the hard skills of your training?
Well, I think there's a lot to say there. I look at it like it's the benefit of doing stuff that's really difficult is you don't have to think about it that hard to know if you're moving in the right direction or not. Just like if you set it up in such a way that a good attempt is only like 75% likely to net you a good result, you're going to spend a lot of time failing, and you're inherently going to get better at that. And of course, people that spend lots of time doing hard stuff, they tend to gain a lot of confidence, and they tend to not be intimidated by things that are normal or easy because they've spent lots of time doing hard things. And I think if you look at a cross section of top shooters, a lot of them, that's probably what they're doing. The obvious fail point of that is that it's you don't necessarily end up walking into training the right skill areas just by setting up stuff that's hard, right? So like if you just set up stuff like 2 at 25 is an example of a drill that I do all the time. So you draw and try to hit 2 alpha in 2 seconds at 25 yards or less. And so the good thing about it is you don't have to think about it whatsoever to know if you're getting the right stuff out of it, because it's only focused on building a grip correctly, applying the vision, grip, and trigger skills as relevant for you and your equipment on that drill, right? But you can spend a lot of time doing the drill and never think about it in those terms. So sort of the flip side of the coin in terms of the opposite strategy is, hey, I have a very specific idea, like what skills or what techniques I want to make into a habit, and I'm going to design drills that make it necessary to do those. And in some cases, yeah, it's just going to be hard stuff. In other cases, it's going to be stuff that's easier, but you're focused much more specifically on making some kind of a specific outcome happen. Obviously, being a coach or being someone that has all kinds of experience, it's easier to do the latter approach than the former approach. But that's sort of the pros and cons to both approaches, I think.
Yeah. So it depends a lot more on what your focus is. It is kind of what I'm getting out of what you're saying.
I think a lot of people don't necessarily have a focus. And for those people, just doing hard stuff will move things in the right direction as long as you're approaching it in a somewhat sensible way. The more sophisticated your program is, the less just doing hard stuff all the time makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I can see that, because it's going to highlight things a lot more obviously as far as like what you need to work on. Kind of like matches do. You go shoot a match, see what you suck at, and that's how you prioritize your training.
Right.
A lot of people have different kind of ways of doing that, but something I wanted to ask you, like, how do you kind of structure your training? Like, are you shooting matches every week? Are you shooting matches once a month? Or are you just being able to, let me just throw something out really hard, like what you said, and find out what I'm, need work on? Like, how would you recommend someone that like doesn't have a plan to train get one?
I mean, we talked about that a little bit, right? Like, you got to start with goals as far as stuff that you want to accomplish. And in a perfect world, you're able to come up with like deficiencies between you and accomplishing that goal. So like you can't really just cite it by skill level, right? But let's just say, for example, to pick like 3 skill areas out of the air. Let's say like someone wants to get more confidence on shooting hard targets or wrist targets or far targets, like precision shooting. That's one compartment. Movement is another compartment where they just want to be comfortable moving around a stage more. And then gun handling could be another compartment, just to make it easy, right? Like, you could easily think of various scenarios that you can tee up to structure a session around, where you pick just 2 of those and you focus on the stuff that needs improvement. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm the same thing. Like, it's probably not those specific areas, but I'm working on stuff that I know that I want to be better at, like being more, for me, like a good example. Hey, easy. All right. Sorry, got a
Okay.
noisemaker over here. I got like hitting steel more consistently is a good example. Like that's one of those things that sounds super elementary, but if I'm honest about it, and I look at like my performance for like average or bad matches over the past, or really honestly across all matches, like whether or not I'm hitting steel with a level of consistency I should be, that's a huge predictor of success. So that's one of those things that is constantly a part of my training, like programming in like, hey, you need to see this level of detail or you need to build in this degree of a pause to be able to hit steel every single time. Right? Like that's one of those things where I'm always pushing to move the needle more and more in the right direction that way. But if you don't have a specific idea of what things you need to get better at, or at least what you're bad at, then you're kind of screwed as far as finding something to practice. So that point, you're better off just picking something that's difficult, or just seeing something that someone else is doing and copying it. Go, buddy, come on, go around. There you go.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. How do you personally approach your dry fire? Are you like purposely trying to replicate whatever your live fire practice is in your dry fire, or do you just kind of have like a set routine where you're just like, all right, grip, vision, movement, whatever, we're just going to do this kind of dry fire routine every single day?
Right.
Or do you like structure it off what your live fire practice is?
I mean, like, I can tell you what I'm doing now, and I can tell you what I've done over the years. I've been doing this for a pretty long time. So, I mean, at some point in time, I've tried everything. I've done full-on stages. I've done trying to, like, rep it out for consistency. I've done micro drills, gun handling stuff, precision focus stuff. More or less every technique that I think you could think of, I've at least tried it and see if I can get value out of it. What I've been doing more recently in dry fire is I focus on basically what some people would call speed mode and accuracy mode. So there's two fundamental compartments. I focused on trying to be effective at pulling the trigger hard and fast, basically working towards like dry fire build drills, where the focus is on just like lock your eye on a spot, like pull the trigger as hard and fast as you can without letting your whole hand pull the trigger. And the other compartment is just precision shooting. We're on to be able to still do gun handling stuff aggressively, keep your vision where you want it, and be able to like place shots very precisely without disturbing the sights, right? So that's the fundamentals layer. And then from there, I pretty much will only work on transitions and movement on top of that. So the transition stuff we try to make extremely demanding. Like you shoot a sequence that where you would run out of bullets because it's so lengthy, and then you try to like make that part correct and make the vision piece and the sight confirmation piece absolutely perfect at speed. And the movement piece is obvious. Like that part works exactly the same as if you're working on a stage live.
Nice. So you're really like probably at this point trying to make things like the duration of your training much longer to either set fatigue in, see where things fall off. I'm assuming if you're doing all short reps of everything, you're probably not having the wheels fall off as easily as you would to be doing longer duration reps of, say, like you said, target transitions.
Yeah.
Like if you threw up a 5-target array and just kept doing 5 targets in a row over and over and over again versus that 5-target array, but doing it 20 times in a row before you reholster and take another rep.
Obviously, the more lengthy and complicated the procedure gets, the less, the more you're going to just look at success. Like, would that have been good if it was actually live shooting? And less like, is this going to be perfect? Because if I do something as simple as dry fire build drills or like, a 2R2, you can be infinitely nitpicky with making that perfect. Right? If I'm doing a sequence where it's like I'm shooting simulated 10 shots or less with 1 draw, 1 reload, like something that's roughly that complex or less, I'm going to be extremely specific and particular about what success looks like. Like it's either perfect or it's wrong, right?
Yeah.
So like a way, not the only way, but a way I've been able to enforce that and like get the pacing of the training right is to just say, hey, I want to do 5 good reps, right? Like I don't care how long it takes me to get there, but I want to do 5 really solid reps where it's like, yeah, there's nothing really to improve on that. And that sometimes that takes like just 5 or 6 reps to do, but obviously sometimes it could take 30.
Yeah. Or 3 hours.
Right.
So obviously you've been competing like for a while now, like we talked about. What do you think? We've all seen, like, obviously we're not going to name any names, but at the local matches, the guys that have been the same forever, right? What do you think like those competitors are missing? Why, like, you see some guys that, have been shooting for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years and have gotten insanely good really fast. And you see other shooters that have been shooting for 15 years and have not moved the needle whatsoever. What do you think like those people are missing?
Honestly, if someone's been at it for more than 3 or 4 years and they haven't really made much progress, like just talking statistically, not being mean, they're probably not going to make progress, and that's more of a decision than just an unfortunate consequence, right? Like a huge part of my goal setting thing that I do with clients when I take them on is saying like a part of this is going to be an audit. Like, what do you have to give, and what do you want to invest, and what do you think you're going to get out of this with this level of effort? And being realistic, is that worth it to you? Like being honest about consequences of how much time do you have to give, how much money do you have to give, you know, what familial obligations do you have that you may need to just communicate to your family, or that may potentially stand in the way of you accomplishing some goal through the work it's going to take to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And I think a lot of people end up coming in and out of the sport because they're not really honest about that dimension of things. Like, you know, how much am I really going to get out of this, and what do I have to give? So when I see people that kind of spin their wheels, like in general, that's probably the single most common issue, is like people just aren't being realistic about how much they have to give or what they really think they want to get out of it. And when I see people that do that well, like they are able to write down a couple pages of notes sort of in the way that I'm describing, like big goals, supporting goals, like ways to audit the supporting goals. And then you do that with an audit of your life. Like people tend to maybe not necessarily, like, well, obviously if someone is willing to put forth that level of effort in just studying how they want to get better, they're pretty likely to get better because obviously they're taking it serious. But also the people that go through that effort tend to burn out much less quickly. And so that like maybe they're not going to set the world on fire, be the best shooter ever, but they're going to enjoy it for longer.
Yeah, no, I could definitely agree with that. I feel like a lot of people, and you would know, underestimate what it takes to be great at something. Like, especially in the sport, like how much time, money, sacrifice, all that it takes to like really get good fast, especially in this sport. A lot of people are just like, oh, if I do 10 minutes a day, I'll be master or grandmaster, or I'll be first place in my local matches, or you name it. But to your point, like doing that audit and being accountable, like, hey, you say you want to be good. This is probably what it's going to take to be good. Do you have the time, and the ability to make it happen? If not, it's probably not going to happen. No matter what kind of secrets you get along the way, you can't really replace consistent hard work. And it's like back to my first question I asked you is like, what's your training gear like? And you're like, I need the gun in my hand every day, whether it's live fire, dry fire, or a combination of both. If you can't do something like that along with smart planned training, becoming great is probably not on the horizon, which can be hard.
I mean, a lot of people, they'll start doing training and they realize pretty quickly, like, that's not the part of it that they enjoy. And the only people that I see get really frustrated or like, burn out in the sport are the only people that happens to a lot of people. But the sorts of people that happens to the worst are the people where like they see, like they fall in with a peer group where like those guys want to get better, or they take it very seriously, like based on ego, and they want to be good, but just don't really enjoy the process of getting better. Right. And to that person, like you probably have it in you to want to go get good at something, but shooting just may not be that thing. Like to me, training is like the most fun thing I could possibly do. If you told me right now I would never win another nationals, nothing about my day-to-day routine would change. Like to me, like getting as good at this as I possibly can is the fun part.
Loving the process is so important.
And I mean, like, that's not like, it sounds super cheesy. Like it sounds like, oh yeah, put that on a poster in your bedroom or bathroom maybe. But like that's to me, it's fun. I enjoy it. And for the people that get not even great, but good, obviously that part has to be there where they enjoy the process of going and doing training and applying some discipline and effort to it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, a question someone wanted me to ask. So it's right on this topic. If someone could only get to the range, say once a month, and to shoot live, what do you think they should be working on in dry fire and the occasional match to get better?
Yeah.
So say they have either their job is super demanding, they can't make it to matches all the time. So they have, you know, family commitments or whatever and can't get to the range every week. Like if you're just, you know, that dude that wants to be good enough, you know, what can they kind of work on and expect to get better at?
Just first of all, people that end up in that predicament, which is not at all uncommon, they tend to focus on the once a month dimension and not the 29 days a month dimension, right? So obviously, if you're in that situation, it's easy to look at live fire training like this is where the training happens. This is where I'm, you know, spending the money, carving time out of my day to go somewhere else to do the training. It's easy to look at that like this is the part that counts. And sure, but like the part where the progress is going to happen is the other 29 days out of the month when you're doing stuff that, you know, you can replicate to whatever extent you can, and then attempting to treat your live fire session like that is just validating the work that you've done through focusing mostly on fundamentals and approaching it with a mindset that like all that training and dry fire was homework, and this is like a test that I got to go validate what I'm doing to make sure that the dry fire portion is being kept legit, right? So that's a very important mindset to bear in mind. In terms of the content, I think you can work on anything in particular. The tricky thing with dry fire, right, is to some extent you have to have the skills you're trying to get or really deeply understand the skills that you're trying to get in training on a specific area in order to avoid the pitfalls that are going to come from dry fire. Mm-hmm. Like you've been teaching some people. How many people have you spoken to that say, oh yeah, I did all this dry fire and I came back and my shooting was worse? Or on some level, I did all this dry fire and I went to go shoot and it felt completely different. Right.
Unlearning bad habits.
Yeah, unlearning bad habits you learn in dry fire. Like that is the thing that happens to people. And obviously the correct answer is if you're doing the dry fire right, really treating it seriously and attempting to replicate what's happening in live fire, that disconnect really shouldn't be that much of a thing. Like when you go shoot, you shouldn't be surprised by what you're able to do. It should just be replicating what's possible.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's not a very specific answer, but it's definitely like, I think the part that's wrong with the attitude towards it.
Yeah. I think you're 100% right. Like in that case, it's almost more your mental attitude towards training than it is like the actual content of your training. Yeah. In my opinion, I mean, it has to be quality reps, but you have to be like very deliberate and focused. And that one day at the range isn't your only day training. Like you said, those other 29 days, that's your training.
Yeah. And to give any more specific advice than that, I would need to know like that guy's skill level and like what it is he's actually interested in to really give us a more specific recommendation, honestly.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I feel like a lot of people too that are, you know, either strapped for time or, you know, they can barely go to the range. Like a lot of times that those 29 days, they're just simply checking the box. You know, they're dry firing. They're just like, oh, I did my X amount of time today, put the gun away. I checked my box. I've trained. Now to do it again tomorrow.
Right.
Instead of like going in with a deliberate plan, like spending that time, I'm going to work on this skill and I'm going to make sure I am like quality reps in perfecting what I'm doing right now because I don't have the instant feedback of live fire to have every week to make sure I'm not having those bad reps. And, you know, like we talked about, that those bad habits that you can learn in dry fire if you're not checking yourself consistently.
Yeah, that part's really challenging and people really struggle with it. But I mean, like, I to give a specific example, I had a dude who I wouldn't say I was close friends with him, but I talked to him pretty frequently. And this dude did a 100-day dry fire challenge where he was there posting what he was doing every single day, like rain, snow, whatever, holidays for 100 days straight. And at the end of it, there was no real articulable gain to the skills there. And it's like, for that guy, it's certainly not a lack of effort, right? Yep. He's doing the training, but there's definitely no gains coming out of that. And you have to ask yourself why. Like there's no real honest introspection into what the person is trying to get better at in that case. And so that's probably the single biggest downfall is people will go do it thinking that dry fire is like, it's like doing push-ups where if I do this number of push-ups, I'm going to get this much stronger over time. And it's way more like studying than it is like exercising in the sense that if you're not all there, you're not likely to get that much out of it.
Yeah. It's so much more of a mental focus thing and being able to self-analyze yourself than it is simply, I did 15 minutes. I did my hour today. I did my fill in the blank. You're definitely spot on. I think this kind of plays into my next question for you, but what do you think the difference is between like a good shooter and a great shooter? I mean, there's lots of GMs out there, but there's very few. I'd say, there's an even higher class of the real GMs that really make it. I'll say like the super squad guys. Or obviously there's a large skill gap between the regular GMs and those super squad guys. What do you think is the thing that separates those people?
Uh, uh, if that's the rift we're drawing, like someone that is like a freshly minted grandmaster based on classifiers, like I have a rough idea what that person looks like compared to like your median super squad dude. The biggest difference, like there's a huge difference in the actual skill level. Number one is like the skill durability to be able to execute on a top level, not just once in a while or just like over a small stage, but in any context, like with movement involved and with some level of stress involved in weird situations that you've never seen before. Like that is just a level of skill durability that really is reflected. It's just a higher level of skill in general that's only reflected when you put someone in a weird situation they've never really been in before. And of course, there's a huge layer on top of that as well with the mental side of things, with how you can someone's attitude towards shooting and how subject they are to small adversity, I guess you could say.
Yeah. So you would say it's more like there's just another level of skill these guys have on top of a major mental advantage as far as performance goes.
Yeah, like the gap between someone that's a freshly minted GM and someone like your median super squad guy, the skill level difference there is huge in terms of just the raw skills, I feel. If you're looking at the difference between a guy on his first year on the super squad and the top 2 or 3 guys that are liable to win a nationals, the difference in the skill level is probably somewhat comparable depending how competitive the division is, right? But the mental game difference in terms of the lessons you have to learn over time are very, very different.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. That makes sense. Kind of a little more off topic, but why'd you choose, like I know you shot a bunch of different divisions. Why'd you choose production versus like carry optics? What's your kind of mentality on that?
I mean, first of all, I shoot everything.
Yeah.
I shoot carry optics, production, limited. I'll end up shooting limited optics a little bit at the end of this year. I've always, well, until recently, always chosen to shoot the division that has the most heat in it. Taking you all the way back to 2013, right? Carry optics didn't even exist for another 3 or 4 years after that point when I started. And it wasn't competitive or reliable. And the dots weren't really that reliable until probably 8 years or so after that point, right? It really wasn't until probably roughly 2018 or 2019 that there was like several good, reliable dot options in the market where people could go spend this amount of money and expect to get this much performance out of the equipment. So carry optics being really popular is a relatively new thing to the last 5 or so years. So I started in production because it was as competitive or more competitive than carry optics is now, right? Like now that we have LO and CO in the same sport, a lot of the talent has been subdivided, and sometimes people will flow out of one end to the other just to go shoot various matches like nationals or something like that. Mm-hmm. But back then, that entire crop of shooters was all packed into production. It was the biggest division by far. Like no matter where you went in the country, there was top level dudes you could compete against, and that was why I did it. And internationally, that's still pretty much the case. Like it's just as popular as it's ever been. Like PO is starting to get a bit more popular now that it has been consolidated in IPSC. But production is still the biggest division because that's the equipment that everybody has access to internationally. So, I mean, that's what keeps me in it. It was sort of my first love. And there is, I think, a level of skill durability, I think you could say, that you get from shooting iron sights or from learning on iron sights that you just can't get from shooting a dot only. And that's witnessed by asking an up-and-coming CO shooter to shoot irons versus vice versa and comparing the differences.
Yeah, that's a good point. Going where the heat is, obviously that's why
Yeah, obviously,
Scary optics. That's why I've stuck with it. And
as time draws on, that becomes less and less true, right? And it's possible that depending on how this year goes for me, this could be my last year in production. Because while it's still extremely competitive internationally, I don't get a lot of chances to shoot against other top shooters shooting production anymore.
yeah. Well, you still kicked my ass last year, Area 7 with it. But no, that's good. Another thing I'd love to like kind of get your perspective. What's it like working for SIG? Like, do you find that there's extra, I don't know, pressure or anything you'd call it when going into matches? Like, would you kind of call yourself more like a professional instructor for them, like a professional shooter for them? Like, where does that kind of lie?
I mean,
I have no idea how this stuff works, but I'd love to get kind of your perspective on what it's like and how it feels now.
so like the SIG team is like, we're more or less like on call to do whatever stuff they ask us to do and for the betterment of the company, right? Like we're given a lot of leash to be able to do what we need to do to help the company in absolutely any way we know how to. So definitely would consider myself in this job more of a professional shooter than instructor. Teaching classes, especially, to armed professionals, is a really important dimension of that job that increases our relevance and helps the company a lot because we're connected to different, communities that use our products.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it comes with a dimension of pressure that, I'm still to some degree learning to manage. I've been super lucky in my career to have support from all kinds of sponsors within SIG's various divisions almost from the very beginning. But fighting with like what most people would call the imposter syndrome of feeling like you need to earn that privilege in reverse has always been an ongoing thing. And obviously the better you get, the more it validates the idea that you deserve it. But it's always something that you have to contend with. As you get better and invest more, you don't tend to feel less pressure. It's just as you've invested more, so you feel like you have more to lose or more that would theoretically be wasted if you were to not get the results you want.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Kind of talking about the mental side of, those top end competitors. How important do you think, like, for example, you're going in to shoot nationals this weekend. How important do you think the mental side of like actually strategizing each stage? So say, I mean, obviously I'm assuming you have a mental process that you go through the same thing every time you come up to a stage, and that's one thing I'd love to see kind of what your brain learns. But another thing is like I've heard people talk about, oh, I want to know what the high hit factor is for this so I can strategize my hit factor plan. I've also heard people don't even waste your time thinking about any of that stuff. Just shoot alphas as fast as you can. What's your kind of take on that? Just because I've heard, even from top level shooters, the total opposite ends of the spectrum.
There's a lot to unpack with that dimension of it in terms of the mental management and the match management. I guess the big picture advice I would have is that most people's system is designed to make things very, very simple to them in the moment. Because when you're under pressure and you're not able to think clearly, you just have to rely on experience and your visualization and your plan to carry you through the stage and do well. There's really no room to sit here and like rationalize to yourself like why this is important to you, why you have this in the bag, you don't have to worry about it, like, oh, just use this strategy on that target, or like all these things that you could think about to try to make it easier to yourself when you have time to sit here and think about it. Like most people's system is in some way designed to simplify that as much as possible. So all they have to do is, say this one quick mantra or use this one quick cue that's going to get them on the right track. That's based on a huge catalog of experience that is so much more in-depth and complex than anyone could appreciate just from listening to them talk about it. So in terms of getting ready to shoot stages, I think pretty much everybody has some sort of a process that they go through to be able to execute a stage to their ability. I look at I try to pretty much commit to a plan well before the 5-minute walkthrough. Like ideally the day prior, I'm committing to a rough procedure and I have it neck down. So there's very, very small decisions to be made during the actual walkthrough. And that way, leading up to the stage that morning and even into the walkthrough and before I shoot, all I'm doing is first person visualizing the exact details of what I want to use and burn in those various cues that are going to make me successful so that I can avoid problems. And maximize my score as much as possible, right? And in terms of the math dimension, uh, it is relevant only at a certain skill level, because to me, for me, I think it's important, because if I can ballpark the hit factor of the projected hit factor of a stage to within like 3 categories, low, medium, high, that can give me a bearing on what risk options I should be taking, how diligent and careful I should be about locking down alphas and where it may not necessarily be easy to, and various things like that. But of course, that's gated by the ability to operate with enough consistency that you can even make strategic decisions. Like most people that show up to matches, right? They're not necessarily, they're not going to predict to you where they're going to drop Charlies on a target. It's just something that happens.
Yeah.
So if you're that person, if you're basically upper A or lower, realistically, like that dimension of it is something that's kind of cool to bear in mind, but probably not really going to affect what you do that much.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you can't 100% of the time put bullets exactly where you want them and predict it before you even shoot it, your hit factor math and strategy is not going to matter.
Yeah.
It's not going to matter.
Like
if you can't repeat it,
the name of the game is just like get through the match without like any big disasters and without any penalties, with like to whatever extent possible, right? Like for most people, that's the name of the game. Like just be as consistent as you can and try to like maximize your comfort. So
yeah.
like injecting a bunch of mathematics into that equation is not going to help someone where that's all they need to be focused on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it would be for that person impossible to have their mathematical strategy work.
Yeah, well, if it did work, it would just be a coincidence, right? It would be a statistical anomaly, because just like shooting a perfect stage or a completely junk stage, like at a lower skill level, the stage performances are kind of on a normal distribution, where most are average, some are really good, some are really bad.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
injecting more crap into your head when you're trying to just do good for you is not helpful for people that don't have much consistency to their skills.
that makes a lot of sense, and that's pretty on par with what most people have told me. So as far as like your personal strategy, like if you're going into, I know you categorize them as low, medium, or high hit factor stages. Like, what is your strategy? Like, are you saying, if it's low hit factor, we have to have all alphas? If it's medium, maybe we risk, 5%. If it's high, maybe speed matters a lot more and we can risk like 10% Charlies. Like, what's kind of your mathematical strategy?
It's more like the default mode is if a target is open and 15 yards or closer, I'm going to assume that I'm going to shoot 2A zone no matter what. If it's a lower factor stage, I'm going to be less liable to take movement options or movement combination options where I'm shooting stuff moving or setting up into a position. I'll be more patient to get stable so that I can guarantee good points. And on a higher factor stage, right, like where the time is more critical, I'm going to take options that are going to maximize the time. So I'm going to put an extra aiming attention on steel, for example, because if you get hemmed up on plates, like that's going to affect your time realistically more than dropping points could. And I'll take as many movement options as I possibly can, accepting that when Charlies are going to cost me 0.25 or less, I can easily wash off a single or double Charlie on a target entry by saving whole seconds on entries and stuff like that. Like that's the big picture.
Yeah, that makes sense. So essentially you're saying the lower the hit factor, the more the points matter. And the higher the hit factor, the more calculated risks you can take to gain speed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, obviously, like your game you have to know where that hit factor lies to be like, all right, maybe I can risk one position on this out of 4. Maybe I can, these 3 positions here, I have to risk it on these targets here to gain this time and then control on the rest of the stage. I mean, obviously, I'm not sure what your exact mental process is, but it seems like in general terms, that's kind of how you're picking apart stages.
Yep. And basically beyond even just being able to pin down the math and project what the math is and what that means to you, equally important or more important is being able to like realistically assess what you can do. Because like looking at a situation like, oh, I can shoot these 2 targets on an entry, they're 12 yards away, and that can save me X amount of time, but I'm liable to drop X number of raw points on it for doing that. Like that sounds like very data oriented and maybe too specific to be manageable. But being able to look at that and just make an on-the-fly assessment, like, yeah, I know I can do that, or no, I'm not sure I can, or it's 75% to work, and I can shoot these 2 targets and net, a decent probability of success. Like, that's something that just comes with experience and skill, and that's realistically a more important skill than leaning into the math in most cases.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. You have to have like those risks be something you've done before. Like if you're calculating in a risk in a match, how can you guarantee what your risk is if you've never had that scenario before?
100%. If you don't even know what it is, like what you're risking, then how can you intelligently make a decision?
Right. With, like you said, like coming in super hot, knowing that you're going to drop points maybe on your entry target, or saying like, all right, there's a swinger here. I'm going to try and jam in 2 option targets instead of 1. If you've never done that in practice or at local matches for years, like that risk that you're talking about, how do you even know it's a risk?
Yeah.
Could not be.
Right.
You don't know. But that's a good point. That kind of, so next thing I want to talk about is how do you use local matches when you shoot them? Are you using that to like build that experience to test things out in practice, or are local matches every time you go in saying, I'm here to practice my execution and my consistency? Or does it change?
I think there's some of both, honestly. Like it's a bigger challenge for me to execute to my potential at local matches than it is when there's real pressure at bigger matches most of the time. So it's a good exercise in discipline for me to say, hey, go to this match, apply a real program that you ingrain properly on every single stage and try to execute it to your ability. And like that's a bigger challenge at a 6-stage match I don't really care how I do at than it is at the nationals. So that's not a bad thing to practice. And I also think it's at various skill levels, you kind of have to go break eggs to make omelets at locals to figure out what stuff's going to work. Most people don't really have access to the range situation they need to be able to practice all the dynamic skills we do in practical shooting to the degree they need to. So it doesn't make any sense to like treat draw a hard line, like, no, every single match I'm never going to take a risk or do anything that I'm not 100% confident with. Like you have to use low risk opportunities to your advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was me, my last local match. I was like, I got to push, got to get faster. I shot Maine State, saw where my deficiencies were, where I was lacking in time, where I was lacking in points, whether it's movement, transitions, fill in the blank. And these next few local matches I'll be shooting until Area 7 are really just going to be isolating those things and pushing hard on them. I'm going to do the same thing in practice, and that's at least how I'm going to structure it, but I totally agree there. So kind of more on the teaching aspect. I know you've taught people, whether they be law enforcement or SWAT to, competition shooters to, I'm assuming, probably everyday carriers. Like at this point, you've probably seen a large spectrum of students and athletes. What do you kind of think do you see commonalities and issues that students have, or do you find that each of these different communities all have, different issues as far as what you're coaching them on?
Yeah, definitely. Like you'll see, like in general, people that come from a given background, like they're all going to be subject to roughly the same version of the same thing, right? To like sort of give a little bit of color to that, like people that do athletics that are in really good shape, that are in the gym all the time, and they tend to want to try really hard and put in a lot of effort and basically solve problems through force, which can cause a lot of problems in shooting because it's one of the rare sports where the harder you try, you don't necessarily do better. So I mean, that opens up a whole array of issues related to neck and body tension, causing people to be slow and imprecise, which the harder someone wants to hang on to their perceived control, the worse the tension problems are going to get, right? So law enforcement are a good example where they tend to be a lot slower and more methodical, and sometimes it's depending what agency we're talking about, the fundamentals may be there only to a degree where like they can get hits without a real meaningful time limit, right? And so the fundamentals are not what we'd hope for them to be competent at practical shooting speeds. So like it's difficult to push those people outside their comfort zone by fixing all the baseline issues and then asking them to go faster. And when it breaks down, the new techniques breaks down, they tend to be reluctant to adopt it. And mill people are a different version of the same thing. They tend to be super accurate, uber focused on accountability, and that opens up its own host of issues as well. Again, where the accountability is absolutely paramount. So like letting them cut loose and go fast it's difficult for them, and you have to make it very clear there's not really any consequences for failing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. In their scenario of training, it's definitely, I can see why the accountability or being very methodical like makes sense in their head, especially how I'm thinking they normally train. But how do you think? Do you see those same problems with competitive shooters that come to be coached by you,
Yep.
or like the regular EDCer that comes to you that maybe he's had a gun for a few years, they shot in the range, they never shot a competition. Do you think they have a lot of the same issues, or sometimes do you see the exact opposite? Like some people just want to go fast and don't care where the bullets go.
You get a wider breadth when you get a strictly civilian class, because not everyone's obviously has that same training background to be like, hey, if you put a bullet in the wrong place, someone could die, right? Like that's obviously where that comes from. So
reasonable.
You get people that come at it from different angles. And in my opinion, people that are naturally inclined to go really fast and push the envelope, those people tend to have a better long-term prognosis in their development, because you can always take someone that's fundamentally sound and reckless and teach them responsibility. That's actually pretty easy as long as the person is willing to put in a little bit of time. But when you have to change someone's technique and then ask them to go faster, they tend to look at it like, they understand, like when you say slow down and get your hits is bad advice, right? Like everybody knows that that's stupid advice, like when it comes to a training environment. But people cling on to that idea really tightly. You can tell, because when you give them a new technique that clearly works better and then ask them to go faster and it breaks down, they're inclined to blame the speed and not the fact that the technique is not ingrained.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, so people always run into that. They're like, oh yeah, well if I slow down, I would get my hits. And I'm like, oh, so you're telling me you slow down and you get your hits? And they're like, oh, well no. I'm like, well, that's what you said, dude. So like, people that are slower by nature, that are very responsible, I feel usually they tend to have a harder time getting faster, because they have to learn to get faster and then accept that they're going to break eggs in the technique to get there. And that's very, very difficult for those people.
Yeah. Failure. It's something in practice you have to be comfortable doing a lot of.
Yeah.
Not seeing success on a target, because a lot of people, like we talked about before, much more result driven than they are process driven.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing two holes nice and close in the A zone feels good.
Yeah.
Seeing Charlie Mike 10 times in a row and not knowing what's going wrong is we've all done it a million times, but it can be very defeating if you're not committed to that long-term process.
Yeah, it's good to sort of loosely identify which of those two camps. Like if there's two poles, or like at one pole it's people that want to group shoot on a stage, and the other pole is people that want to get the time to stop as fast as possible. Like identifying where you are in relation to those two extremes of the spectrum, and generally working to get in the other direction, like that gets people pretty far, like up to around M class most of the time.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense, especially if you're at like a far extreme of it. Like especially if you're at, I feel like, the insanely fast shooter that can't hit anything but like gets the times, versus the person that cannot miss the alpha. Like as long as you can push them in that drastic opposite direction, like usually things start to normalize.
Yeah, things will usually get better, but will get worse before they get better. But like the actual fundamentals at play will usually get better, and then the long-term prognosis will be better.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. How often are you like filming your matches or practice sessions? Not for, obviously not for the IG, but for your own learning and analyzing them? Is that something you're like, all right, if I'm dry firing, I got a camera up every time, or if I'm live firing, I got a camera up every time, or match, or is it, maybe once a week for one of my sessions I film? Like, what does that kind of look? Or do you not film things at all to watch?
In matches, I'll film pretty much everything because I want to have the full scope of the information. I mean, that gives you a rare opportunity to get a lot of accountability and test yourself on what the real test is. Like, that's what we're training for, is to win in my case.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll film that always, no matter what. I just don't always post everything because, I'm only going to post it if I think it has value. Dry fire, I will maybe once every 4 or 5 sessions bust out a camera to look at something specific, but I don't really do that very often anymore. There was a time when I did it all the time, when I was, living, when I was in high school and when I was in college, and I was like living in a basement, basically dry firing as a part-time job all the time. I was doing full-size stages essentially and trying to replicate the shooting bit as much as closely as I possibly could. So I put a camera on that all the time to be like, hey, does this look like this other guy who I want to emulate in this specific way or that? So that I would do all the time. These days, I don't really film that much in live fire training because I train with my wife probably 90% of the time. We're both together training. So, if I want to get eyes on something, I can say, hey, does this look right to you? Like some dimension of it, does this look right to you? And we'll coach each other a little bit if we see something egregious going on, or if we detect the other person's getting frustrated, we'll sort of nudge them in the right direction, or at least give the advice that you would give yourself if you were doing that.
That's
So I don't
super helpful.
need a camera for that,
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. How important do you think it is to have like a training partner, or, I mean, this is kind of a separate question, like a mentor? Like, obviously, I feel like those are two different things, or they can be the same thing, obviously. But how important do you think that is to like growing as a shooter fast, or not at all?
I think it's pretty critical. I mean, no matter where you start from, eventually you're going to hit a pretty big plateau where what you need is new information to break through it. And so sourcing the right information at the right time is what changes the game on stuff like that. I would say having a training partner can be extremely valuable, but only if you get the right one. Very, very common for people to end up sort of loosely socially committed to go and train with a specific person really often when one person is benefiting from the arrangement way more than the other. So, I mean, if you're able to find someone who has roughly the same goals as you and you're able to bounce ideas off of about shooting at any time, like that sort of person would be a good person to go train with because you're both going to be engaged and trying to get as much out of it as you can. But it does also slow down your practice considerably. So it has to be worth it in that dimension. It's obviously most people go to the range to shoot, not to train. And that's totally fine. That's just, if that's not what you're interested in, you got to make sure that you got the right training partner.
Right. So it's more to do like having common goals and common drive than it is like, oh, this person's worse at shooting than me, they cannot be my training partner.
Yeah.
Obviously,
No, I would definitely. I don't think it's not really gated as much by skill level. I'm obviously. No, I'm not. But make sure she can't hear me. I'm a little bit better than my wife at shooting. For now. Yeah, but she's still a really good coach. So, like the first really great coach I had, Jerry Tatro, he was an instructor at the SIG Academy. I got to be pretty close to his level pretty fast, hung with him for a little bit, and then passed him. And he was still an amazing coach for me for years. So I would say it's more about like the experience, having experienced the stuff that your partner is experiencing, and ideally having someone who's really smart to be able to just in general communicate ideas to you effectively. Like that's going to make a bigger difference than just skill level, strictly speaking.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Especially because like, I think the most important thing you said on there is being able to have a separate set of eyes, but also like someone that has similar drive, because that's going to get you, honestly, a lot of times through plateaus where a lot of people, if they're just checking boxes, right, like what we talked about, and that other person's not, you're going to see that training partner get drastically better when you're staying still. Some people, that's all they need as far as motivation. But it definitely, you pick the right one that holds you accountable too. I think that's huge. But if you're stuck with a group of guys that are there to talk and shoot at trash, and you're in there thinking in your head, I want to get better, that's a major problem. Like those are the red flags that you that you run away from, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's hard, man. Like finding good training partners is super tough. Like I can tell you there's a really short list of people that I've had out to train with me that I've had back more than once or twice. Um, just because I wanted to get something out of them or vice versa. Like it doesn't happen that often. It takes like I'm extremely nitpicky about it because I know I can get a lot out of training by myself at any time I want to.
Mm-hmm.
But if you find someone like you say that you guys have similarly aligned goals, it can help just to have someone to bounce ideas off of. So
Absolutely. As far as like frequency of training, I know you said like keeping that gun in your hand. What would you kind of recommend as far as like actual frequency? Like, are you saying like, some days it's 15 minutes, other days it's 2 hours? Are you like honestly shorter 30-minute high intensity sessions are better? Are you live and dry firing every day? Like, what's the typical week for you look like?
I think the ideal split is to do probably 6 days a week and probably 2 sessions a day, 3 or 4 of those days.
Okay.
Right. So whether that's live fire or dry fire, that's just going to depend on your lifestyle and how much time you have. Like I'm not going to recommend one or the other. I can tell you for me, I probably am afforded the opportunity to shoot. I could shoot 7 days a week if I wanted to. I probably do actually shoot when I'm training something like 4 days a week.
Okay. How important do you think breaks are? I mean, this is something I've talked to Rob a bit about because he's definitely a big proponent of like actually taking a break when
Right.
it's time. Same as, I'm sure you've met Angel Sanchez as well. He's been like big on me about that because there was a time like for 2 years straight, I didn't miss a day. 365 days a year. A lot of it, obviously, the vast majority, it was dry fire. But then I started running into issues like injuries or major fatigue, or luckily I didn't hit burnout at all. But it was more like actually getting injuries from it. How important do you think breaks are in structuring into your training?
Obviously, for injury prevention aspect, it's only as important as it is to prevent injury. But I think some of the biggest breakthroughs I've had have come on the heels of taking a little bit of time off. And again, jumping way back to the goals section, right? Like I break the year down into like sort of you try to break it down into 3 phases where it's like I have big matches I want to do well at right in the beginning of the year where I'll do sort of a big push through winter to get better. Usually have like nationals in the middle of the year, like we are now, where I have like a sort of a 3-month block where I'm trying to prep and get ready. And then I'll have another one sort of in the fall, usually, where I'm, again, trying to build skills up, do an execution phase of training, and then hit the match. And those can be punctuated, those phases, like it would be natural to punctuate those with a week or 2 off shooting. Of course, where it's my job, I don't necessarily get a week off pretty much ever consecutively. But I've also in my career been pretty big on only doing training when I feel like doing it. And I know that sounds like, well, that's like the opposite of all that hoorah motivational stuff you were talking about. But I think it's pretty important to avoid burnout. Is if you're not going to be invested in it, you're not going to enjoy it or study what you're doing while you're doing it and try to learn as much as you can from it, it's probably not worth doing. And that means if you don't feel like doing it, if it's an absolute chore to go do it, it may not be worth doing for you. So like, again, I think the frequency it's determined by just how determined you are to get better, how driven you are to get better, and how much time you have access to. But there's almost no such thing as more is not better. Like it's going to help you no matter what, as long as you're actually making progress in a direction. I think the more nitpicky your goals are for the stuff you're working on, the more you're going to need time off to punctuate that and learn from it. Like if you're trying to get from a 1:10 reload to a 1-second reload, for example, because that's such a specific, nitpicky, muscle memory oriented skill, like just doing that for 2 hours instead of 10 minutes, you're going to get the same thing out of it, or maybe even like make it worse. So if you're focused on something that's that specific, it's going to take time off for you to learn the lessons you need to learn.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Kind of going into my last topic here, nationals obviously is here. It's here. I am assuming your goal, and we don't even need to talk about it, is winning.
Yeah.
When you go into each stage, or honestly just going into this match, like what's your goal outside of winning? I'm assuming you could be going into each stage and your focus is winning a title or winning this stage or whatever it is. Like, what's kind of your mental process going into nationals this year?
It's one of those things where obviously, yeah, the goal is to win. Like I have three big goals this year. It's to win both USPSA nationals I shoot and an IPSC world shoot. Right, I'm cards on the table with that one. Like that's the goal.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the goal on the ground during the stages, the goal is always to shoot to your ability, right? And if I do that, if I shoot to my potential, I will win every stage of the match, right? Because there's like if I shoot to my ability, there's nothing anyone can do to beat me. Of course, that's not going to happen, right? Like you're going to take bumps and scrapes along the way on the way to winning a match, and like going out with the goal specifically to win each stage is not usually a good mentality to get into because there's going to be stages that play to your strengths and some stages that don't. Some stages where you have blind spots in your planning and your briefing where you just don't shoot to your potential. Bad shit just happens. Like you can get, bad scoring calls or malfunctions in your equipment or the range equipment. Like bad things can happen. So if you just go in with the attitude of like not making mistakes, it's not really going to set you up for success. But if you don't go in with the attitude like, yeah, I can win this match if I do what I know how to do, then you're that will be a self-fulfilling prophecy also.
Yeah, so you're just going into it with confidence, doing what you want. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Kind of to wrap this up here, I always like to ask people, especially if they're instructors or not, why should somebody take a Mason Lane class, or why should someone, get a private lesson from you?
That's a really good question, actually. I mean,
To sell yourself.
it's a good question because, I could just glaze the hell out of myself, be like, oh yeah, I'm the best at this and stuff. But like, I'm trying to think of something specifically that I do differently than other people, in an articulable way. I mean, I try to source information from a lot of different people. I've been doing this a pretty long time. Um, and I definitely like to think that I'm a student of the game in the sense that I don't think I have it all figured out. Like if you told me today that you need to strip down your entire technique and relearn, like the way you would relearn to shoot a revolver, right?
Yeah.
Right. I would do it if that's what I thought it took to win. I would do it. So I'm not dogmatic about very many things. I try to, I guess, like my basic training approach is always I have a layer of expectations for what the fundamentals need to be in terms of consistency, as far as how the gun behaves, as far as what you can do accuracy and speed wise. And my goal is always just like add layers on top of that stuff and see how it degrades, or ask a person to go faster, or both. So that's the basis of my approach compared to some other people, I guess. If that sounds cool to you, then come on out. I guess I guess that's a really good question. I'll have to think about that one a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I work in sales, so it's a question I get all the time.
Okay, so what's your answer? I'm curious.
Why should someone take a class with me? No. Okay, perfect. I think someone should take a class with me if they want to get better, if they want to keep learning. Like you already said, if shooting and learning the skill and improving it is something they're really interested in, I think that I can provide them an answer in my area. I mean, obviously we live somewhat close in the New England area, but something I've found is that there is definitely a lack of quality practical instructors or coaches, especially coaches. And I feel like, with Paradigm Performance Group, me and Angel in our area can fill that gap for people. That would be my answer.
That's, I think, the most interesting thing you said there is the distinction between instructors and coaches.
Yep.
That's not a distinction I think very many people really are aware of. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference. And actually, an analogy I just talked to someone about is, see if I can explain it right, but I think a coach cares a lot more about the individual and their process of getting said result versus an instructor is focused a lot more on the blanket result. So say, for example, like an instructor would go teach something. Here's this drill. We're going to do this drill. This works on vision. We're going to spend 200 rounds on this. Ready, set, go. We're going to go. You may get a random critique here and there, and that's kind of the goal, right? We're going to do this and work on vision, and this is what it should look like. Go. Versus a coach is, all right, we're going to work on, say the same thing, vision, but we're going to talk about, isolating what that person is particularly struggling with. Maybe if we have to change the direction of where we're going and really isolate things on a personal level and focus on what they're struggling with and, kind of dialing it in more personalized than just an overall statement. At least what I think. That's kind of jumbled all around, but that's my kind of take on what a coach versus an instructor is. And it really just comes down to, I think a coach is more personable and really focused on that individual's process than the blanket result.
Yeah. It sounds like you're saying basically an instructor is more content oriented, where they have an idea like, hey, we're going to work on this stuff, where a coach is willing to throw out the playbook and basically do whatever the person needs to actually make progress and towards whatever they're doing.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better than what I just said. But
I had all that time to sit there and think about it and like abbreviate it a whole bunch. You were just sitting there spinning your wheels, and I got to just sit back like this for a minute. So,
but yeah, I mean, what would you think the distinction is between an instructor and a coach?
I think I'd pretty much agree. I think there's coaching that happens in any instructor's class in the form of feedback, and like the more individually oriented that can be, and the more conscious the instructor can be of where that person is and how their content fits into that person's training, the more they can do that, the better it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like if we're looking at it like it's two different jobs, I think you nailed it.
Yeah. And a big thing that I always say too, because people will ask, like, how do I find a coach? How do I find an instructor? I think a big sign is if that person is unwilling to teach private sessions, I don't think they're a coach, personally. Unless it's like time oriented or like their schedule doesn't allow it. Obviously, that's if you're teaching classes and you're traveling all around the country and you're at one twice a week, that's a different story. But if they have the time allotted and they're like, nope, I don't do private sessions or one-on-ones, I think that's a major red flag that they probably can't coach you.
Yeah, or they just don't want to. Like, I'll speak for myself in that, I don't do very many private lessons anymore. And I probably only would say I coach people that I'm friends with, and I do it for no money. Like, I do it because I want those guys to succeed. Like, I was on the phone with one of my clients on Sunday, like, hey, we're going to nationals. Are you ready? You're feeling ready to go. I want that guy to do good. Like, I don't care if I make money on it. You know what I mean?
But you will. That's the thing.
In teaching classes than there is in doing that.
But you will. That's the thing. So none of that, like, willing to take private sessions, did I say, like, taking money, right? Like, you're still willing to put that energy in one-to-one to, students, your clients. Obviously your time is different than other people, but you still have that ability and you're willing to. I mean, that's coaching.
Yeah.
No, you're right. The thing that I would say is if that person is totally closed off, I think we've all come into those instructors where you're like, hey, maybe the full class setting isn't for me. I like to have things more personalized. Can I do a one-on-one? They're like, no, don't offer those. Very closed off about it.
Well, I think that's just sort of a business decision too, because I know, like, depending on how people's time is structured, like, you could say no with a number, or you could just say no. And, like, depending on how the conversation is perceived, one can be more polite than the other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I know, like, people that are even busier than me, like, they could say no by saying, yeah, it's $4,000 for a day, because that's what I could make doing a class that same day. But that's, like, it's more offensive than just saying, nah, man, sorry, I can't do that.
That's a really good point. Yeah. How can people find you? If they want to book a class with you, if they want to host you, if they want to find where your classes are, like, how can they find you? How do you particularly like people to get in touch with you?
I feel like I should take a step back. My privates are not $4,000 a day. It's way, way less than that. My privates are much more affordable than that. But if I'm available on socials, obviously you see me here. Like I'll respond to DMs as best I can. If I always tell people in classes, I respond to everything, and if I don't have time, I will try to respond when I have time. If you want to get a hold of me for a class or something, you email me at masonlane.lsat@gmail. Then you can get a hold of me that way as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks, man, for taking the time. Good luck at Nationals. I'll be watching. Go crush it. Take home a title. And I'm sure I'll talk to you when you get back.
Awesome, man. Cool. It's
All
good
right.
talking to you, man.
Thanks.